In the first series of films, we discussed the elements of creation. We examined light, water, earth, stars, animals, and finally, humans. And we saw how these elements are metaphors of Christ's love. In this series of 6 films, we're going to explore how we live out Christ's love. We'll be focusing not on the nouns, but on the verbs, on actions. As I grow older, I'm increasingly struck with the need to find a balance in life. Wisdom is all about knowing when it's time to plant and when it's time to harvest, when it's time to embrace and when it's time to let go. Life is about seeking a balance between too much and too little action. And for some things, we might even find that there can't be too much. There isn't moderation. Is it possible to spend too much of our time seeking God's will, for instance? Well, after God created the world and everything we know, we could ask, what did he do on the 7th day? Many people think that he simply rested. And it's true, God did rest on the 7th day, but he created something else. God ended his work on the 7th day, and what he created was rest. Nothing comes into being without God, even and especially maybe rest. And so our series of actions actually begins with an indispensable inaction, rest. Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I'll give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I'm gentle and humble in heart, and you'll find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Rest. How do we find rest in a 24/7 world? I was in a restaurant recently. It was a little too loud, it was a little crowded, and it was a little too expensive. And the person across from me was a new friend. And we're talking, really yelling over the noise. And we're trying to have a conversation. And then his cell phone lit up. It was buzzing on the table between us. He grabbed the phone and actually started text messaging a response. And when he's finished, he looked up at me and he apologized. He said, "I used to have a few minutes of peace when I was out to eat, but not now. I'm on call 24/7. I'm always working." We live in an age of labor-saving devices. Machines wash and dry our clothes. Robots make cars and they vacuum the floors. You can have a 3-minute egg in 30 seconds. But you know, if you quiz the average person back in the 60s who was going to the World Fair and you ask them, what is the future going to look like? They would have said, well, it's going to be clean, it's going to be convenient, and we'll have plenty of leisure time. No one could have predicted the harried, crowded, technologic future that we live in and that we feel trapped in, often trapped by the technology that was meant to free us. It's not uncommon to hear somebody say today, I can't give up my whatever piece of technology, even if I wanted to. Well, something about God, the maker of this universe, relates to people who are in slavery or bondage or feel trapped. God is the God of the oppressed, the downtrodden, and the overworked, even if they put themselves into that situation. And the Bible tells the story of the Hebrew people who were slaves in Egypt. They lived in a country that ruled the earth, and everything was centered on the Pharaoh. There wasn't even a word in the Egyptian vocabulary for freedom. Freedom was what the Pharaoh gave you, and that was it. There wasn't anything more. The book of Exodus is about this nation of people, these slaves, and their only purpose was to make building blocks, bricks for storehouses for the Pharaoh. The meaning of their life was bricks, bricks, bricks. You see, rest doesn't just happen. It's a gift from God. And God led the slaves out into the desert, and he gave them rules. They're sometimes called laws, and without them, society degenerates. Of the laws he gave them, and there's quite a lot, he gave them 613 if you count them out of the books of Moses. There's a top 10. And this top 10 you're pretty familiar with probably. Don't kill, don't steal, don't lie, love God, don't take his name in vain, don't commit adultery. In their world, and even in ours, the most unusual commandment, though, is the fourth commandment, to rest one day out of the week. And for me, it points towards a divine origin for the Ten Commandments, because I don't think there's a business or a corporation or an individual that could come up with rest one day out of the week. You see, the first three commandments involve our relationship to God, and the last six have to deal with us dealing with each other. But the fourth commandment, to take a day of rest, is the fulcrum between God and humans and even the earth. What does the word Sabbath mean? It simply means stop. That's all. See, the Hebrew people didn't have names for the days of the week. There was 1 day, 2 day, 3 day, 4 day, 5 day, 6 day, stop day. The fourth commandment says that on that stop day, we don't work. We don't make our sons work. We don't make our daughter work. We don't make anybody in our house work. We don't make strangers work. We don't make illegal aliens. We don't make minimum wage employees work. We don't make anything work, including the cattle and the chicken and the sheep. We stop, we cool our jets. We just idle our engines on that day. The stop day, I think, makes our lives into music. Now, my wife isn't a music teacher, she's an English teacher, but she has something from her life that illustrates this point. When she first started teaching, she had a student named Clinton, and he gave her a paper. It was his first paper he handed in. It was 3 pages long. It didn't have a comma, it didn't have a period, it didn't have a paragraph in it. It was one 3-page run-on sentence. And I don't think God intended our lives to be like that paper, just a run-on sentence. The work of our life is meant to be punctuated by rest. Musicians talk about this. They say that it's not the notes that make the song, but the pauses in between the notes. And I think this is equally true for our lives. There is a memory for me which just defines Sabbath rest. And it happened when my kids were younger. We lived in this house, and it had this big attic and window on either side, and the only thing in there was a hammock and a pull rope. And the kids and I went in there one evening when it was too cold outside, but it was actually perfectly warm inside. And Clark was pulling on the rope, and Emma was on one shoulder and he was on the other. And I read this book to him. And at the end, I put the book over on the floor. In that just quiet, they both fell asleep. And the pendulum just slowed down. And to me, that's peace. And I think that heaven is going to be a whole lot more like that moment than the typical Monday at work. Stop day is a piece of heaven, and it can be taken with us, that feeling, into the other 6 days of the week. My question for you is, why in the last couple of decades have we decided to throw out the fourth commandment? Why throw out a day of rest? And which commandment are we going to throw out next? Now, Jesus isn't a legalist. Instead, he's about the intent behind the laws. So if the 10 commandments say, for instance, don't kill somebody, Jesus says, don't even call him a rockhead. If the 10 commandments say, don't commit adultery, Jesus says, don't even cruise the internet looking for racy pictures. So what does Jesus have to say about this longest of commandments, to keep a day of rest once a week? He clarifies that God's work is to be done on this day. So it's okay to feed the hungry. It's okay to take care of the sick. It's okay to go and rescue an animal. But we're still supposed to stop. The Bible is about people living in a fallen world, and we're trying to have a relationship with God. And the crazy thing is, sometimes it feels like we're not even content to just be a fallen world. We're putting rocket boosters on our back to go faster. And a day of rest, I think, is to counteract this. It's about restraint, and that restraint is needed now more than ever. For me, one of the most profound lines in the Bible comes from the Psalms. God says, be still and know that I'm God. And I had a woman come up in a church and say, you know, I've meditated on this for years by simply taking off a word as I go along. And since then, I've found a lot of people do it. And perhaps you could try it on your day of rest. Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am. Be still and know that I. Be still and know. Be still. Be. Stop day is when you're not a human doing, you're a human being. Just be. I'll tell you what my wife and I do on our day of rest. We always clean the house the evening before. We don't do email. My wife has a ritual of closing the top on the computer. I always take a nap. We take a walk outside every Sabbath that we get. We rest in rest. And if there's an important deadline coming up and it just seems like we have to get it done, we stop. We trust in this promise of God that there'll be enough and that we're given a day of rest. So my prayer is that the first action you take in this series of actions is to rest. That in a world of 24/7, you go 24/6. If you can't imagine 24 hours of rest, start with 4 or 6, but just start. Stopping is about restraint. It's about not doing everything that we can do, but finding the peace of God that passes all understanding. I pray that you realize that the Sabbath was not meant to be saved by humanity, but that humanity was meant to be saved by the Sabbath. I pray that you find peace in this oasis of time that God created at the beginning of the 7th day. And I pray that you remember to open up this present of stopping one day a week. I pray that you will be still and that through rest you will come to know God. And it will be good.